And welcome back to All Sports Western New York. It's my old buddy Art Wander on the show and the tiny tot of the kilowatt. Art,
I am,
you
yes.
realize it's strictly a coincidence that you're on our April Fool's edition of All Sports.
I'm not. Are you trying to say something?
No, I want you to.
That I'm a fool?
No, of course
One of the
not.
legends in Buffalo?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yes. And if no one believes you, just ask you. We have to start out on a somber note because last week it was the passing of Ralph Wilson. And you have had a unique relationship with Ralph over the years. You wrote about it on All Sports WNY last week. But tell a little bit about how you and Ralph got to know each other and what the relationship was like.
Okay, as you well know, after my days at KB Radio with Danny Neverett and Irv Weinstein, I was programming stations around the country, but kept coming into Buffalo, especially once Buffalo got the Buffalo Bills with Ralph Wilson. And I used to always go over to their offices, which were in the Lafayette, or the Statler Hilton at the time on Mohawk Street, and I met Ralph Wilson over there. That was about 65. At the same time that I had breakfast with my kids at the Statler Hilton, and who should be there but good old Lou Saban. And I went up to him and I said, "Hey, Lou, you wouldn't have a couple of tickets for today's championship game, would you?" He reached in his pocket, tickets to the game. Bless his soul. But anyway, back to Ralph. We met because Jack Horrigan was a good friend of mine. And Jack Horrigan, PR guy, and really a great guy. Then I met Ralph there at that time, and Jack asked me, the next time you're in town, could you bring me this particular record? I said, sure. So in 1969, I happened to come in, and I gave Jack the record, and Ralph Wilson was standing there, says, "Hey, you wouldn't have to have the music from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid." Well, being the programmer that I am, I naturally said it was B.J. Thomas, B.J. Thomas who sang the song, Raindrops Keep Falling. So I says, okay. He gave me his address at Grosse Pointe. I went back to my office in Memphis, Tennessee, picked out the album, and sent it to him. He sent me a nice thank you note. Then I sent him another letter and said, by the way, here's what the FCC is going to do in some proposals, because Ralph owned television stations. He also sent me another letter and says, by the way, the next time you're in town, please be my guest at the Buffalo Bills game. Then when I went on the air, bashing the Bills that I was, he never, every time I saw him, he never mentioned my bashing of the Bills, because if they did well, I would praise them. So I saw a lot of him, and then in Fredonia practices, I was there all the time because I was doing my nightly show, and asked him if he would come on the air with me. He said, sure. So he came in into the trailer, and all of a sudden his first words to me, he says, "You're like the Pied Piper, with the exception is that the mosquitoes are following you." And it was loaded with mosquitoes, but he stayed the whole time. Then at one other instance, we were sitting on the bench a little distance from the practice field in Fredonia, and I don't know whether he planned it or something for me, but he gave me some information and said it off the record. I never used it, but that indicated to him that I would keep things off the record. Then he told me a lot of things about the way the National Football League is being run. The bottom line was, he said, Art, sportsmen no longer are involved in the game. It's businessmen who are interested in nothing but the money.
And you also had a running joke with him about his now late daughter, Linda Bogdan.
Yeah. So I was on the air on WGR at that time with great ratings, I might add. And all of a sudden, callers would say, "Hey, we're worried about the Buffalo Bills staying in Buffalo. Is there any way you could suggest to Ralph on how to keep the Bills in Buffalo?" I said, absolutely. Linda Bogdan is Ralph Wilson's daughter. She's also a scout for the Buffalo Bills. And I said, Linda, right now I am proposing marriage to you. Now, when I marry her, if she marries me, that's going to be a situation where I'll keep the team in Buffalo. As you know, the Buffalo Bills always had a nice luncheon for the media every year. And so consequently, one time, the luncheon is there, and Ralph was there, and I'm sitting way in back, and all of a sudden Ralph shouts out, "Hey, Art, I don't see the ring," which
So
I
he
thought-
heard it.
Well, he heard it. So
And that became a running line. between the
running
two.
line, and then the other time was when he was telling me a lot of stuff on how the National Football League is changing from sportsmen to businessmen. We were sitting over there, and he asked me. He says, "By the way, Art, when the team comes off the field, could you introduce me to Reuben Brown?" I said, "You haven't met him?" He says, "No, I haven't met him yet." So that's what happened. Reuben came off the field. I said, "Reuben, I want you to meet the guy that's paying your money, Ralph Wilson." They shook hands and everything.
Ralph Wilson was not perfect by any means, and none of us are. And, there were some years where I know they were even afraid to introduce him on the field because he'd get booed by the fans. He had built a reputation through the 80s because of the bad teams that they had. But then after the Super Bowl years, I think he started to get his just due in this town. I don't think some of the younger media people in this town understand how tempting it would have been for Ralph to move that franchise.
Oh, he would have made a fortune. He would have made a fortune elsewhere. I mean, he could have doubled his own personal wealth by moving the franchise to Los Angeles, San Antonio, and other cities that would like the franchise. The thing that I couldn't accept is the constant mention that Ralph was cheap. He was not cheap. Look at the players that he got. $50,000 to two offensive linemen that were particularly bust. His problem,
$50 million.
right? $50 million.
Right.
His big problem was getting the right general manager after Bill Polian and John Butler left.
Artie, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back, talk more about the Bills and the Sabres.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know what I'm doing here?
What are you doing?
Sending a message to a wonderful little person, Jennifer, from the movie The Sting.
We'll be back. More of All Sports right after this.